What's up, everyone? We're so excited for today's show. Remember last week when we reached out through social media asking if any of you were first generation? First generation Americans raised by immigrant parents. Well, through a friend of a friend of a friend, we got connected with Monica Ehlers. She is a chef and entrepreneur, total sweetheart, and turns out a total badass. She's coming on Drinks with My Wife right now to share her story. So let's see if we can get her to spill some family tea over whiskey with tea. Oh, God. Don't tell Juana what I said. It's going to suck. Let's go. Monica, the reason we reached out was because we would definitely want to talk about, your first gen experience. It is something that I am obsessed with simply because Juana, I'll let her tell her story. But it's so different than what my existence was. And so I've just become, it's been this slow obsession, just learning what it was like when you're growing up, the child of an immigrant. So, yeah.
And what's interesting is I didn't realize that was a unique experience. And I think a part of that is because, and I don't know if this is true for you too, but I think a part of that was because I lived in a neighborhood where there were other American-born children who I was friends with, and their parents were not born in the United States. And so it almost, I didn't really realize that this was so unique, such a unique thing to be born to an immigrant, quite frankly. And I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about how diverse that upbringing could be from someone who didn't have that experience. And it was really, quite frankly, once Terrence and I got together, and of course, that process, right? When you first meet someone and you decide you're going to spend time together, you're having a lot of conversations, hopefully, and you're learning a lot about one another. And so it wasn't until that point that I really he started asking me questions that I had to really think about. Like, wow, I never.
Did it feel unique when you were growing up? Because you grew up in Chicago, or did you grow up out here?
No, so I was born in Chicago, and there's actually a lot of Indians in Chicago. Yeah. And I came out here when I was young. I was probably 5 when we moved to California, but my grandparents still lived in Chicago, so I'd spend summers out there. So I'd be immersed in this really traditional Indian household when I'd go to Chicago. And then my mom here, she came to the United States when she was I want to say maybe that 18, 19, somewhere in there. And she fell in love with the United States because especially being an Indian woman, there's so many opportunities out here that you don't get back at home.
Sure. Right? The list is endless, I'm sure.
So I grew up in the Valley, Ventura County, and then the Valley. And a lot of my friends, I had a lot of Persian friends, which is a whole nother story when you're Indian and your friends are Muslim.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then, I just grew up with a very eclectic group of people. But what was different is that at home, because Indian culture is so drastically different than American culture, is I felt like I was stepping into two different worlds.
Interesting.
So at home I was in one world, and then I would step out and I would be in a different world. And I tried so hard to push away any of my Indian heritage when I was going to school and stuff like that, because I wanted to fit in.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
I totally understand that.
And Indian culture didn't become trendy until just recently.
Right. Right.
There's the hippie movement in the 60s and the Beatles and stuff, but it didn't become really trendy until just maybe a decade ago or something, where people really started to embrace it. And now everybody and their mother wants to tell me about an Indian restaurant that they ate at and stuff like that.
But that's interesting because you also, you brought up something that I hadn't thought about actually, because there's certainly that component of being the child of Indian parents, but you also have the religious component of it that is huge in the Indian culture. And that's really kind of interesting. I never thought about that as a dynamic, as well as you are dealing with potentially other first-gen children who are of a strong religious background, and that's really kind of interesting. I never thought about that.
Did you feel more? I know the thing of code switching, where like you said, you go back to Chicago and you got to get back into character, or whichever one it is. Was there one that you felt more comfortable in, like Chicago versus Los Angeles, or rather the culture, less about the city?
Well, it just what it was. I felt like I had to keep my Indianness, if that's a word, behind closed doors.
Oh, wow.
Like, I felt like it had to kind of remain secret. And because when I would have friends come over, predominantly like my white American friends, my Persian friends, their household is going to smell similar and and actually a lot of Persian people like Indian culture. So we had stuff in common, but I would hear things like, oh, your house smells different or weird, or what did your mom say? Yeah. But my mom was speaking in English. She just had an accent. So it was like,
that's really funny.
I don't know, you were there, didn't you hear her?
Exactly.
I've never had to translate English to English before, so I don't know what to say.
But that's really funny because my dad had a really, really thick Italian accent, more than my mom did. But my mom had an accent, but my dad had a very thick Italian accent. And when he would be talking with friends, they would always kind of be looking at him, but at me at the same time and going, like, what are you saying? Yeah. Like, they don't even want to ask.
What is he saying?
That's right. What is he saying? It's like, and you're right. You get so tuned in to how they're speaking that, of course, for you're like, well, what do you mean? You didn't get that? But when someone doesn't have that trained ear, they don't.
And they grow up with it.
They don't understand it.
Did you speak your parents' native language?
No. So that's another thing. Like, and I don't know if you experienced this in your household, but when I felt like I walked out of my house, like I wasn't American enough, and when I walked back into my house, I felt like I wasn't Indian enough. Because I don't speak Hindi as the language, or Punjabi. It's like a dialect of Hindi. But I understand it fluently. So another thing that my mom would do, and talking about like that ear that like you're hearing them speak and like you're not picking up on an accent, but sometimes my mom would switch back and forth in English and Punjabi, and so I can understand both languages fluently. I can't translate it the other way.
Right.
Interesting.
Wow.
And so and I don't like, do you speak Italian?
I do, yeah, I do. But what's interesting is my parents, they each came from a different part of Italy. So my dad was from northern Italy and my mom was from south of Rome. And so they had different dialects. And they met in the U.S. And when they spoke Italian in front of us, they spoke proper Italian. They didn't speak their dialect. They spoke proper Italian. And so my sister and I, that's what we learned, was proper Italian.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
We didn't learn based on dialect. But where the challenge came in was because my, English was not their first language, sometimes they would say things because they're immigrants learning a new language that weren't proper English. And so that's how I would learn it too.
Yeah.
And then I get made fun of, right? Because I'm not saying something properly, but it's like, listen, this is how I learned it in my house. I don't know what to tell you. And so that's the really kind of funny thing. But what you said about stepping in and out of the world when you leave your house really resonates with me because I wanted nothing more than to be American. I wanted nothing more than to be American.
My God,
And I wanted to be able to come home and have chocolate chip cookies and milk, when I walked in the door that my mother had freshly baked, like whatever those images of Americana
Instead, it was like
are.
biscotti and shit.
And latte.
And
that's literally, that's no lie.
She grew up in a Starbucks.
Yeah, exactly. My mom was a barista before there ever was one. But that's the absolute, you're absolutely right. Or, there was a time our junior high school, it caught on fire. And so the cafeteria, the cafeteria was inoperable for a lengthy period of time. And so everybody had to bring their lunch. Well, I didn't grow up in a house with Wonder Bread, right? I grew up in a house with a huge crusty loaf of Italian bread that my mother hand cut. Each slice was about this thick. And
glorious.
She would put, now it's glorious, right? I wish I could eat that every day. But, then, and she would put like mortadella and prosciutto and maybe she'd put some marinated artichokes on there and then wrap
Sounds
it.
delicious.
And then wrap it in wax paper.
Yep.
Right. Not even like everybody else had, tuna fish.
Ziploc bag.
On Wonder Bread in like plastic wrap or aluminum foil. And here I was with wax paper, this huge big ass sandwich, but it felt embarrassing because it draws attention to you when all you want is to fit in. And so it was.
And you try to shove that part, like kind of keep it at home.
Right.
That's how I felt, at least.
Yeah.
Like, keep this at home. Keep it behind closed doors. I'll go to my friend's house. You don't come over here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. 100%.
Did you mentioned, white friends, because I think about, growing up I grew up in Evansville. I was born in Fort Wayne, which is not very far from Chicago, but I was raised in Evansville. And so you didn't have a lot of immigrants. And then those immigrant children of my age, but those who did, you had to choose a side. So you either hung out with the black people or you hung out with the white people. And so what was interesting is that I found that specifically, like if they were Filipino, they hung out with the black kids. But the few Japanese kids that I knew and Chinese, they hung out with all whites. And I always felt like as I got older, I began to appreciate like, man, they don't get to explore their culture the way they can when you're around another ethnic group, when they're around another minority, you know what I mean? Hubert's Filipino. So Hugh was hanging out, didn't care. You know what I mean? Like he got to be Filipino. He got to be different. The smells got to be different. So was that, did you have any like Indian friends and stuff? I know that sounds really naive, but did you have Indian friends when you were growing up and stuff?
So it's interesting because I had, similar to how I explained, like I wanted to keep my Indian heritage behind closed doors. Like I had Indian friends that were attached to my parents because they had Indian friends and I grew up with their children. Right. But I never had them mix with my white American friends. Right. And what's, I grew up in LA and like my husband calls us the latchkey kids because he grew up in New York, in Queens, and then Long Island, and like everybody was like together all the time. And he's really comfortable around Italian people because he's like, like his neighbors were Italian, his best friend, and like it was always like family around all the time. And us growing up in the Valley, like all of our parents were working. Like my mom worked all the time. She was on call. Like, so we were by ourselves a lot.
I grew up in that house.
And so, so like, even with my Persian friends, like we were all whitewashed, we were all whitewashed. And so to my family, I'm not Indian enough. Right. And especially as I've gotten older and I've started to connect more with my Indian culture, I'm not Indian enough to like white people. They're like, oh, well, you don't have an accent. I'm like, because an accent's going to make you fucking Indian. That's the only qualification you need.
It's all it takes.
And it's always fascinating whenever someone gets to, we used to call it like someone wants to check your blackness.
Yeah, they get to define.
Yeah, they get to go. Oh,
define it for you.
Where there's like, because while I never dealt with it, I did have some friends who were, you grow up black and you go to advanced classes. I knew some black people who got checked. It was like, oh, you don't act black. Like, who the fuck are you? How do you get to decide?
Yeah,
exactly. Like, how do you get to decide what my level of ethnicity is?
Yeah.
Yeah, and can you please show me where the manual for blackness is?
What? Yeah, exactly.
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 We don't have that in the house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's even within your own groups too, which is what I find fascinating.
Sure.
Yeah.
When Juana, like I never grew up really hearing people speak other languages. So once we were together, hearing her speak Italian was like tuning into my favorite TV show. Everything's all dramatic. Oh, blah, blah, blah. When she's talking to her cousins and shit, I just sit frozen. But that being said, like you don't, if you don't necessarily speak the language, I do wonder. What's that? Do you feel like did you feel like you missed out on something? Because you said as you've gotten older, you've connected more. But did you feel like you were missing out growing up, or is this something as you've gotten older you start to think about?
I do feel like I missed out. There's certain levels to it. I mean, my name is Monica. It's not a very Indian sounding name. My brother's name is Neil. And my mom purposely did that. Her name is Neelam. And like my mom purposely picked names for us that at least on paper wouldn't be considered as something different.
Right.
And my mom really didn't want us, and I think this is true for a lot of immigrants who come here and they bring their children. Like they're coming here to start a life for them and to make a better life. Right. Especially when they're leaving like more like third world countries, which India is, and like, I think that my mom really wanted us to embrace our Indian heritage, but at the same time was terrified of us being seen as different.
Right.
So go ahead.
No, please go ahead. Finish, please. Sorry.
So I think that like, as I've gotten older, like I do feel bad that I don't know my dialect. And like, even when I try to say words, I mean, I sound like a total valley girl.
Let's hear some. Let's hear some of it. Let's hear it. That would be fun.
Mickey Pata. Like I just like
for real.
You even shook your head when you did it. I love it.
I like it. Sassy.
And my family's gonna listen to this and they're gonna be like, I don't even know what you're saying.
But that's what they'll do. Juana's people would have corrected Juana. Remember that bartender that he was Italian, and you never really spoke Italian, but he always wanted to speak Italian. But then he would correct her. Yeah. I'm like, man, that is the most non-black thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm like, the fact that he corrects you, I said that would start a fight in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
But they'll correct.
But as you were talking about that, what's interesting to me about your parents' behavior and wanting you and your siblings to be entrenched in America, and because they came here for that purpose, do you think race played a part in that? And here's why I asked that question. My parents were from Italy. That's European. They're white. And I never felt that. I never felt like my parents wanted to came to this country to create a better life for themselves, and then they had children, and so by virtue of that there was just going to be a better life for their child. But I never felt like they wanted me to be entrenched in American culture. In fact, I felt the complete opposite of that. Yeah, I felt like they wanted me to hang on to my Italian roots. And so I asked the question about race because that's a component that you had to deal with that, quite frankly, I never did. And do you think that contributed to them giving you very Anglo names, for lack of a better terminology for it, or rather not traditional Indian names? Could that have been a part of it, maybe?
I think for sure. I think also when for my mom was a very successful in the medical field. She ran like radiology departments and so I mean, being a woman, being an immigrant, having an accent, looking different, sounding different, like there's all these layers there.
Wow.
And I don't think that she intentionally wanted us to detach from our Indian culture. In fact, now she gets frustrated with me that I'm not more attached to it. And I'm like, okay, Mom.
You don't get it both ways. You can't raise me this way and then ask me to be somebody different.
But I think it comes from insecurity about race, for sure. You know, like, because it doesn't just stop with the color of our skin. There's like all these other layers. And like, I mean, I remember my mom used to, like, people would tell jokes like in her colleague group, and like she would laugh and then go into her office and write it down and then come home and like ask me what the joke was, you know? And then like, you know, so I think that she, in order to protect us, she didn't want us to ever feel insecure or inadequate. And so she didn't really push like us being Indian in the household. But I mean, we ate Indian food. We watched Indian movies. I mean, I love Indian movies. We listened to Indian music. There were Indian parties. Like, all of that existed. But like I said, it was very like behind closed doors. Like, this is what happens at home. Right. And then go hang out with your white friends in the streets.
Yeah. That's interesting because, and again, I feel like I used to always say, I grew up in Connecticut, and I used to always say that there was, I felt like we were airdropped. You know, an Italian family was airdropped into Trumbull, Connecticut, and it felt like our yard and our home was Italy in Trumbull because it wasn't just about the food that we ate, and we didn't eat Italian food every day. We didn't eat pasta every day at all. But their attitudes towards things were very, very Italian. Like, just as an example, when I was a kid growing up, and, you know, you go to somebody's birthday party and it's a sleepover party when it's, you know, when you're of an age where that takes place, I was never allowed to sleep over someone's house. I could go to the party and my parents would say to me, we don't care, call us at midnight, call us at 2:00 in the morning, we'll come pick you up, but you're not spending the night. Because in Italy, this is not a thing.
Yeah, sleepovers and
a sleepover birthday party is not a thing. And so for them, they couldn't make sense of it. It became this thing of like, but you have a bed. Why are you sleeping at somebody else's house? You know? And so I literally would make excuses for why I couldn't spend the night. And it was horrible, you know, when you're that age, when you're 10, 11, 12, and all you want to do is be hanging out with your friends. And again, feel American. And now I've got to make some stupid excuse for why I can't spend the night, but my parents are happy to pick me up at 2 a.m. when we're done watching scary movies or whatever the hell we were doing, you know? And so that dynamic was also really, really weird for me because, again, they were so incredibly Italian all the time. I couldn't date. I couldn't, you know, it was really, you know, God forbid a boy called the house. It was like...
Yeah, there was a lot of that.
You know, according to my father, if a boy called the house, I could get pregnant. Like, it was really...
and then you get older and you're like, oh, it's really hard to get pregnant. You get pregnant just from some guy looking at you?
So it was really challenging. My parents were incredibly strict because they had also these very old-fashioned views, quite frankly. And as a child of the 70s, they had these very old-fashioned views. You know, my parents were well into their 30s before they had me as well, which was unusual for that time frame, right? They weren't young and in their 20s. They were well into their 30s. And so there was this old-fashionedness. There was this being Italian. And it was a lot to battle, man. It was just a lot.
What was dating like?
Yes.
Oh, God. Take a sip if you need it.
Do it. Let's all do it.
Well, you know, I can resonate with what you were saying about sleepovers and stuff like that. My parents would let me have them at our house, but also same thing, didn't really understand it at somebody else's house. And as I got older, like in high school and stuff, my friends, and I have a core group of friends that like I'm still friends with them today. We've been friends for 20 plus years, awesome. You know, like, and you know, they always joke like, oh, Monica was never around past 10 because she was always grounded, you know, but like it wasn't grounded. Like I had a really strict curfew. And if I wasn't home, like my mom would go out hunting for me.
I like
you
that.
know, like,
my dad did that.
My mother, I had that mother.
Yeah.
Yes.
My dad did that.
My mother would show up on the block. It didn't matter if I was hanging out in the wrong block. Oh no, you know your mama was up here looking for you. Dude, you better get home.
Yeah.
Like my mother was fearless.
Yeah.
Yeah, she raised 3 boys. She didn't care. Yeah.
That's funny. My dad would do that too, except he would get in the car and have no idea where to go because I never said where I was going.
Right. Yeah. Like
it didn't matter. He felt the need to be looking.
Yeah. And when it came to boys, like, I mean, I just never talked to my mom about it, you know, until I got older. And I never dated an Indian boy. Like I refused to date an Indian boy. Like
how did they feel about that? How did they feel about that?
I remember I was such a dick. Oh my God.
We all were. Don't feel special. We all were.
I remember having a conversation with my mom, and my mom would go through these phases. I think it was probably in my like early 20s or something like that. She'd go through these phases of she wanted to put me on this website called shadi.com, which is like Indian like matchmaking, basically.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, and so she'd always be like, well, let me just put you on it, and you know, you can pick out who you want to marry, and like, but like, let me just put you on it. And I said, I remember saying to her, Mom, if you wanted me to just have one flavor of ice cream, you shouldn't have brought me to 31 flavors. Like,
I love it.
That is beautiful.
Actually, 50 flavors in the U.S. If you count every state. 50 flavors in the U.S. if you count every state. They brought you to a place, right? It's awesome.
Wow. That is fascinating. I couldn't imagine that type of cultural pressure that comes with being the child of an immigrant. You know, because Juana has been married before. He wasn't Italian either. So, and neither am I. I don't know if you've been able to tell that. But did your parents want you to date anyone Italian?
Oh God, no. My father used to always say, "Don't date an Italian boy." Always.
Really?
And I remember even saying to him, "Why not?" And he said, "Because I remember what I was like when I was a boy, and so I don't want you dating an Italian boy." I think he was partially kidding, but my first husband was Jewish, so oh my God, that was travesty, but. Not a travesty. I shouldn't say that because they were fine with it. It
was just different.
In the end. But yeah, it was like, because my mom is very Catholic, very Roman Catholic, as you can imagine.
Okay. Yeah.
And my dad, you know, went to church on Easter and Christmas, and that was pretty much it. You know,
yeah.
He didn't really buy into the whole thing.
So he's a traditional Catholic.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They were my Catholic audience.
Exactly.
Which is, it's interesting that you said that because my husband's Jewish, and well, his dad is German and his mom is Jewish, but my family don't even recognize his German side. Like once I said like he's Jewish, they were like, okay, well, if you're not going to marry an Indian, Jews are fine. Like Jews.
Is there a list that you can go down like Jews are fine?
I guess so.
Just choose an oppressed group. It's fine. It's totally fine.
Just no master race. That's on page 2. No.
Right.
That's funny. That's really funny, actually.
Yeah.
It's quite a combination. Wow.
Man.
But I wasn't allowed to date. Actually, my parents were like,
yeah, me neither.
Yeah, you're not dating till you're 18 years old. Now, of course, I snuck around.
Of course, yeah.
But yeah, it was like you're not allowed to date. Which one of the things that always fascinated me is having, again, older parents, immigrant parents, and I'm not sure if you face this as well, but this idea of, because my mom had, of course, she grew up in Italy. She had very, very strict parents as well, and they didn't allow her to date. And what did she do when she was 12, 13, 14 years old? She snuck out of the house.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I finally, at one point when I got older, I said to her, I said, but you wanted to go out at that age. Why didn't you understand that I wanted to and let me do it?
Right.
Because one of the things as parents, and you're a parent as well, is we looked at our kids and we did it the opposite way, right? We were like, listen, we know that you are now 14, 15 years old. You want to hang out with your friends. You want to date. We totally get that. But if you're going to do that, know this.
These are the
and
risks.
we tried to prepare them for what that looks like. And so it always dumbfounded me that, as you know, and I'll talk about my mom in particular, because my dad has a whole nother story, but my mom as a female in particular, who wasn't allowed to really go out and date, like, why would you not understand that that was something that I wanted to do and give me the parameters to do that in?
Yeah.
But it became about just being handed down what was done to you and implementing it with your own child.
Well, does it play, this is for both of you, does it play, Monica, I'm not sure how connected you were to India as you were growing up, or your mother still was. Does it play into not worrying about how it looks in America as much as it looks to your family? Is that a concern?
Yep.
Oh, it was for you? Yeah, I'm just...
big time.
Yeah. Like,
interesting. I don't think it was for me because I had no family here. They were all in
no,
Italy.
that's what I'm saying. So back, your mom and dad worrying about how that's going to look for you back in Italy.
But I don't think anybody would know.
Oh, okay.
They might have thought that, which would have been ridiculous, because how would anybody know? But they might have thought it.
Right.
They might have thought it. Because everything was, I think you're onto, what I think you're onto, and I think is accurate, everything was about a reflection on them.
Yep.
And
100%,
so maybe
Yeah,
there's
that's what I
that.
would, maybe that's what it
there's
is.
that. Yeah.
Did you travel back to India when you were, well, back, you're from America, but
We,
did you travel back to
my
family?
mom and I went there when I was very young. Like I was probably 3
Oh, wow.
or something. And I have strange memories of it that I always thought were these reoccurring dreams. And I would tell my mom, and she's like, actually, because it's so different. It's, like especially back then, I don't know now, I haven't been. I've been wanting to. My husband and I talk about going there with my grandma.
Right.
But dirt roads and, showering out of a bucket. Like when you're a young kid, like that looks very different than like just walking into a shower and water falling on you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so I was able to remember some of those things, but I think what we were talking about the cultural thing of like, how does it look, the reputation, right? How does it look to like, because they want to hang on to, at least my parents wanted to hang on to like their culture here, right? Because it's a safety net, all cultures do it. And, you like, it doesn't matter where you come from. They try to like band together with their people, right? Yep. Like you were talking about that, like you either were in the white group or the black group, and you had to choose. That was your tribe,
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think also there for our parents who came here, like they don't know anything different. It's our generation's job to start incorporating the things that we're learning here.
Interesting.
As Italian American or Indian American or American, I don't know which one's supposed to come first.
Right.
But like, it really is our job to educate our parents on the land that they chose, and to then, as we have children and as we have children, grandchildren, all of that, to educate them on where we came from, and like the reason why I loved talking about this topic so much with other first generation people is like, I feel like we are in this constant identity crisis of like, where do I fit in? And who, like, you know, what am I, like I said, does the Indian part come first, or does the American part come first?
Right. Well, you know,
because I'm equally both.
You know, I asked my mother-in-law moved here when she was 16. Still has an accent, still everything. I asked her just a couple of years ago. We were on vacation. I asked her. I said, "Are you?" I said, "When you think about yourself, are you Italian or are you American?" She was like, "I'm Italian." I was like, "But you moved here when you're 16." Like, you know,
she's a citizen,
and like I'm giving her shit. Yeah, I'm like, "Come on, man." She's like, "I'm always Italian." So I do that identity is so different when you're actually born here. It's like you were saying about that order thing. Like, how do you even balance those things? You know, But
you know what's interesting about that is I think America might be unique in this kind of a feeling. And the reason why I say that is, you know, I lived in London for a period of time. And when I lived there and I ever had to fill out paperwork and they asked me my nationality, I had to put American because that is my nationality. Right. But here, if somebody asks you your nationality, what do you say? Italian. I say Italian. And so it's this weird
Indian.
Yeah. That's right, because it's a very
interesting
American thing that we are this melting pot of all of these countries coming to this place to seek, you know, whatever it is, you know, whether you want a freedom of a religion or you want a better life or whatever.
Opportunities for women, like she was talking about.
Opportunities for women, 100%. And so many people come to this country for that. But you know, my cousins in Italy, they don't question any of this.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
They're Italian and solely Italian. And that's pretty much it. And yet for me, I'm American, but I am so closely connected and feel, quite frankly, very proud to also have this Italian component to my being.
But you know,
that shapes who I am in a lot of ways.
Juana never tells people she's Italian. Never. Even though her name is Juana Coccoloni, people never put two and two together. Because the thing about America, which fascinates me, is we will meet people and they'll start talking about how Italian they are. And so I'll start asking questions just because she won't do it. So I'd be like, "Oh, really? Where's your family from?" And they're like, "Oh, well, Italy. What part? The north, the south?" They're like, I think they're from such."
Well, my great-great-grandfather came here from Sicily back in 18. And you're like, "Okay, well, you're not Italian."
They're treating nationality like this way too. Because the same way that you all were talking about trying to identify with being American, Americans are always trying to identify with a culture unless it's going to impact their life. So that's why everyone wants to say they're Irish, or so many people want to say they're fucking Italian
or native.
Every white person is Native American until it's time to stop a pipeline, and those motherfuckers aren't nowhere to be found.
Right?
Like,
Thank you.
It's such occasional ethnicity. You know what I mean? And so I think that's why, I wonder if that's why you can get questioned a lot more, or you have to identify and choose a group.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. What that has to do with. But I do want to actually move on to something that I think is also very, very interesting.
Can I make a quick request?
Yeah, sure.
Monica, are you going to be able to hang out with us for a few minutes?
Of course. Yeah, I'm having a great time.
I need a refill. We are going through extremely difficult times in our country right now.
Terrence and I are doing our part to fight for justice, and we'd like to encourage you to do the same, whether that's marching, protesting, or donating.
In the description for Drinks with My Wife, we'll have a link to Black Lives Matter and a variety of other charities where you can give. Thank you for joining Drinks with My Wife.
Thanks.
What are you drinking?
I'm drinking a whiskey ginger.
You touch my heart.
What whiskey do you use?
I used whatever we had, man.
Good for you.
Whatever was brown.
Good for you.
Whatever my husband brought and put in a glass.
Good.
I'm having a whiskey sour. Whiskey is definitely my drink of choice.
Yes.
And so, I'll have that open.
And I'm having a margarita.
Nice.
Yeah, it's my weekend drink. I love a margarita, especially on the weekend for some reason. I don't know. I think it's because we spend so much time sitting outside, and there's something about a hot day and having a margarita that's really, really tasty.
Yeah. I don't discriminate against alcohol at all.
I'm a borderline snob. I am.
You're a borderline what?
Snob. About booze. Like, I like to watch how, like, you're a chef. So as a person who loves alcohol, How someone makes a beverage means a lot to me. So,
oh, for sure,
what they're putting
with that,
in it,
yeah,
there's
so
a skill to it.
Yeah, so like when we moved back to New York, because we lived in New York again for a while, we tried to go to that bar that was like down on Bleecker Street. And the minute I ordered a Manhattan, and this young lady, she's like scooping all this little ice, and she's like shaking it. And I was telling her, I was like,
nope.
Yep. I was like,
nope. Do not shake my brown. Okay.
Serious. And I was like, okay, we're paying for this shit, then we're getting out of here. Because she was so nice. We did. We paid. We took one sip once she was gone. I was like, man, let's go somewhere else, man. I can't drink that shit.
Yeah.
That's really funny. But I'm glad that you brought up the fact that Monica is a chef, because I do want to talk about that because you are a chef, and I think, and I'm looking forward to hearing you talk about this a little bit, that a lot of the food that you prepare is based on your culture. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Well, the spices are always there. So, and I didn't realize this early on when I got into food, because how I got into food is I like studying, like I liked collecting early edition books, just in general. And so I found this like these old cookbooks. And so I started reading them kind of cover to cover, and like just really getting like kind of developed my palate before I had a palate. Because I was still, when I was a kid, like aside from the Indian food that I was eating all the time, that like as a child I felt like I was being tortured eating this great amazing food,
right?
Because I wanted the Kraft mac and cheese crap,
which
in
is
a box,
disgusting. Exactly.
Me
exactly.
too.
But it's American.
Me
it's
too.
American.
Yeah.
I wanted frozen pizza and Fruit Loops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lucky Charms is my thing, the gross marshmallows. And so, like as I got older and I got into cooking and I started discovering, I really liked seeing how certain spices traveled around the world. And to me, growing up, like cumin is like a staple. Like you don't even talk about it. Like it's like salt, pepper, cumin. Like it's like it goes in everything.
Yeah.
And so without even realizing it, because I was raised on these flavor profiles, like very like spicy, smoky, homey kind of flavors. Like I didn't realize that it was something unique or different to what other people were having. And so I started really watching how spices traveled. And so my food is very eclectic, but it's all about like combining like how you can take, because like fusion is a hot word right now and stuff like that. But it really comes from the fact, like going back to cumin, right? Cumin is an Indian food. It's in a lot of Latin American food. It's, like you can find it in all of these different cultures, Asian food, and so that's really where I fell in love with food. And I really didn't start incorporating Indian food until much later.
Interesting.
Because I was fascinated with like traveling the world through food.
Interesting.
And Indian food to me, to other people, Indian food is like exotic. To me, it was like the Wonder Bread of my palate.
Right. It's the most basic. That makes sense. Interesting.
Right. And so as I got older and, and I really started doing catering and stuff like that. Oh, you're an Indian chef, especially in the last 5 years. I'm telling you, like prior to that, I didn't get that request as much. But in the last 5 years, it's like, oh, you're an Indian chef. Okay, I want Indian food. I want samosas. And I'm like, okay, let's try other things.
Yeah, because that seems like the most basic of Indian foods is a samosa, right? Yeah.
And so what my favorite thing to do when I'm doing like, because I'll do different types of catering where it's like drop-off catering and stuff like that. But I like to do events where I kind of do a history lesson with the food that I'm serving. And so whenever I'm doing one with Indian food, I try to like be very regional specific, because India is a very big place.
Yes.
That's all I know is that it's big, hot, and far.
Yeah.
Like it's far away. That's it. Big.
And the food is very different, and the type of food that most people are used to is predominantly from like northern India, like kind of where my family is from. That's where you get because that's where you get a lot of the spices and the curries and stuff. Right. And actually curry isn't a native Indian word. It comes from the Brits. There's no actual Indian curry. It's just, that's what British people just called anything that had sauce on it.
Wow.
That's interesting that you say
that.
It's
like the Russian dressing of
because
like, it's not even real.
Yeah, because when when I lived in London and friends wanted to get together, they'd like, "Do you want to go get a curry?" And I'd be like, "Wait, what? Do you want to go have Indian food?" And they're like, "Well, let's just see, maybe just a curry somewhere." What? And it was like, okay, I don't know, sure, let's go. I don't know. But you know what's interesting about this, and Terrence and I have talked about this before. Italian food is one of those things that, for whatever reason, people all over the world can make Italian food, and it can come out very, very good. Indian food for me is one of those things I would not dare make it at home.
I feel that way about Chinese food too.
And Chinese is another one.
Because we love to cook, and we've had the Chinese, like the nice woks and shit. It comes out horrible.
Yes. The Chinese food is another one of those things where it's just like it never tastes as good as when you eat it.
People who are making Italian food are making spaghetti and red sauce.
They're doing
very lasagnas. They're very
lasagna.
What your mother makes when your mother cooks actually pasta, because I literally have to beg her. Like when she makes food, it tastes so different. You know, it's
but this is the thing with Italian food. Everybody thinks it's solely pasta, but there are plenty of other dishes that are Italian that are not pasta related. True. So that's why I think there's this universal appeal to it, and there is a simplicity to bringing an Italian meal together, quite frankly.
And it's good.
And it's so good. And it's so good. But I have to be honest with you. I would never dare attempt even to make a curry, quite frankly. It just feels like a daunting task to me. Yeah. And I don't know why.
Well, it's so foreign for an amateur cook. It's so daunting when, you know, my family's from the South. So I grew up, my mother raised 3 boys. We had to learn how to cook. She didn't give a shit. So we all 3 cook in our homes. And so growing up eating Southern food and Southern style food, the idea of making something like even rice, unless it's going with gumbo, is fucking foreign. I mean, anything, because Southern American food feels so unique to what it is. You know, not, I said Creole. I mean, it's not like it's New Orleans, but Southern American food is its own entity. So while I might feel comfortable making some jambalaya, but the idea of making other countries' foods, like, it's just daunting. Whereas in Italian food seems easier and accessible. Yeah. As long as it's just pasta.
Well, you put a pot of water.
Right.
That's it. I feel like
you just disrespected your whole country.
I know. But I always tell Terrence that, no, not always, but I have told Terrence this story, which is when I was in high school, I had a friend of mine. Her parents were Hungarian. And she invited me to her home. We were like studying or something, and then she said, "Do you want to stay for dinner?" And I was like, "Oh shit!" I had a feeling my parents weren't going to let me, but I thought, let me just call them and ask them. So I called them and I asked them, and they said yes, which was shocking. And her mom, because that's who cooked, her mom made spaghetti and meatballs. And
this is going bad.
Yeah. But here was the odd thing about this whole thing. And of course, as an Italian, I was just like, okay, I don't even know what to do here. There was a bowl with spaghetti. There was a separate bowl with sauce, and there was a separate bowl with meatballs on the table. And literally, I sat there going, what do I do right now? Because I literally, that's not how you eat spaghetti and meatballs. No. Like, my mother, when she made spaghetti and meatballs, it was a big bowl and it's all mixed together and the meatballs and everything. And so it's interesting. Yeah,
you're going to eat dry pasta with some sauce on top.
It's all rubbery and stuff.
Exactly. So, do you primarily do catering?
I do catering, and I do I do special events. So well, right now I'm not doing anything because we're all quarantined. Right. But actually, what I started doing during the quarantine is I started making stuff to go. So I'm doing my company's called Old Scratch.
Yeah, we're going to put a link on the website and everything.
Oh, thank you.
Of course.
And so it's called Old Scratch Kitchen, and so the to go stuff is called Old Scratch Market.
Oh, wow.
And I have people who have worked for me, like I have them as delivery drivers right now, and I'm making a gamut of things, and just to keep doing what I'm doing. Right. The thing that I learned from my mom, if there's one lesson I took from her, is my work ethic. That woman is adaptable, and it's you just figure it out. You know?
Yeah.
But it's what's fascinating about doing this marketplace thing is some of my old Indian friends that I'm actually not that close to as I've gotten older. We still connect through Facebook and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
They have started ordering my food. And they'll say stuff like, I have this red pepper dip that I make. And they're like, oh, it has Indian spices in it. It just has cumin, like we talked about. That is the only Indian spice that is in there. It's red peppers and almonds.
But it's got cumin, so it's an Indian.
Right.
And it sounded like you had, at some point, a cultural awakening, not like an awakening, but you started drifting towards more toward that. Do you find... not the Facebook friends, but as you've come across other Indian people, whether they're immigrants visiting or whatever, do you feel a stronger kinship to them? Is your identity changed a little bit?
Well, what's interesting is a lot of my Indian friends that I grew up because our parents grew up together, or we were just forced to be friends kind of thing, they're all in interracial marriages too. So I have a friend who's married to a Filipino woman. I have, another friend who she's married to a white guy. It's just as we've grown, I think that going back to my 31 flavors analogy,
Which is beautiful, by the way.
It is.
Yeah. We're growing, and our American side of us, because we are American. We were born here, and my mom doesn't consider me Indian, which I think is weird.
You made me.
Yeah. It's no, you're American. You're not Indian.
Yeah.
I'll talk to her about the political, the race movement that is going on right now. And whenever I identify as being a minority, she corrects me and she goes, "You're not a minority." And I'm like, that's not how people see it here. Okay, Mama?
She's obviously never been to Alabama. Please.
Brown is brown.
I mentioned a friend of mine earlier named Hubert. He's Filipino. And he was actually born in South Carolina, but he grew up always living around black people. But he has a brother, Filipino parents. He's but was always very Filipino. But he talked about he got pulled over when he was in college, and he said he pulled over. He said, "I'm with 3 black guys," and this is serious. The guy goes, "All right, niggers, get out the car." And Hubert just sat there. He's like, "You heard me?" And he was like, "Hold on, me? Did he just call me nigger?" He was like, I was hoping to sit this one out. He's like, "No, you in South Carolina, dude. Get out the car, boy."
Monica, do you have children?
I don't know.
So you're doing all right financially. That's awesome.
But do you think, and of course this is all theory, right? But do you think that should you have children, will it be important to you to kind of impart on them this part of you that is so culturally based?
Yeah.
Is that something do you feel like that's going to be really important to you?
Well, my husband and I we're in the next stages where we want to plan to have a child. And with the quarantine, I was like, I don't know if this is the best time to have a child.
Yeah, exactly. but quite frankly, you got a lot of time on your hands, so it might happen now.
Yeah,
but it's kind of like a biodome if you have it now.
Right. It's like the best or the worst time to have a child, you know? And I had this thought the other day, and it really made me sad, but like, it's also what's really true for me, especially with what's going on in the world. Because like, I think there's this awakening happening for white people in this country who believed that racism was a thing of the past. Right. Mm-hmm. And they're having a really hard time, but they're also not able to see that like racism doesn't just start and stop with white and black people.
It doesn't. It's so much more complex.
You know?
Yeah.
So
and it's not just the really traumatic stuff that we're now seeing because there's social media and phones and things like that. Racism is something, when you have a darker skin tone, like, it is something that you live with every single day.
100%.
And like in like so many different nuances that it's hard to even explain because you're so conditioned to receiving it that you don't even recognize that it's happening.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and so I had this thought and I shared it with my husband and I said, you know, when we do have kids, I really hope that they come out with your skin tone and blue eyes. Yeah. You know, and he's like, oh my God, no, I want my, you know, like exotic, beautiful woman to give me exotic, beautiful children.
He's like, that's what I signed up for, Monica.
I want that for him too, actually.
It's interesting what you were saying though about in the modern world, like there's this cultural awakening, and like I make the joke about my friend Hubert, but the reality of it is one of the benefits. There's a benefit and a beauty to being black. I never get to hide. I never get mistaken. No one ever questions my shit, and it's beautiful. But I also have a support group. You know, I remember another guy who I grew up with, worked with when I was younger. He was a poor white guy. He'd grown up poor and white. I said, we were having one of those political debates, and I was like, the difference between being poor white and poor black is I got the NAACP. I said, you don't realize how much the system sometimes is working against you because you've been so conditioned. And it's kind of what you were just saying about other ethnic groups. Like, I got to go home, no matter what I went through when I was in class in high school and in college, I always going back to a black neighborhood and a group of black people. But if you're if you're the only Indian person in your neighborhood, or would have to deal in a bubble, I would imagine. You know, I don't know if you could get support from other people and they would recognize what you're going through on the daily. I just guess. Yeah. It would.
Did you grow up in a neighborhood with a lot of other Indian children?
I was the only Indian on that block.
Interesting.
Like,
and it's LA, that's so bizarre.
I mean, it was Woodland Hills.
You're like, let me be clear.
Understood.
Not 900. Let me give you my zip code.
You've now painted the picture. We get it. We get it. Yeah. But what about in your school? Like when you were in the kind of primary schools, elementary, or maybe even secondary schools, were there...
I don't remember seeing any Indian kids. Actually, there was one girl who was Indian, but like her parents were hippies. Her dad was white. She was like, it was a very different Indian than what I was raised at home. Right. Like her parents were doing shrooms and stuff.
I like that house.
Like, so you hung out there a lot, is what you're saying.
Right. But she was the only Indian person I remember ever really coming across.
Interesting.
In my growing up, that wasn't a part of that Indian group that I told you about. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the kids. I'm sorry, because I could be picking your ear all night, but I do want to know, like you mentioned about the potential to be having kids, or if you were to have a child, and would there be? Do you not see it getting better? Do you think it will be better for the next generation? For like if you had or if you're an immigrant moving here now, do you think their kids may have it easier?
You know, it's hard to tell. Like right now, I think that like we have this like this wound that has been scabbed over that is like open and hemorrhaging out.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of emotion happening right now. And we have to first get through that. Yeah. But I do believe that, like, I mean, it's relatively new for people like us who are in these interracial marriages for this to be legal. It's like a little over 50 years old.
People have no idea. We post about loving every year. Like it was just recently. Yep.
Yeah. And so I think that it really takes us having children and then our children having children to really start to see the change, because we were talking about earlier about the levels of being exposed to racism in like our daily lives that is hard to explain when you don't live it. Like it's going to take my husband and I having a child and that child looking different, and then my husband having to support his child through that differences, and then them having a child. Like I think it's going to take some time. I don't think we're going to see it in our generation. You know, it's up to our kids to continue, and as more people from different backgrounds get together and more conversations like this. Like I don't ever get to have conversations about what it means specifically to be a first generation American.
Oh, wow.
You know, and
that's awesome.
that's something very specific.
Right.
That's interesting.
You know?
That's interesting that you say that, because when I asked you about your neighborhood and where you grew up, and if you had other Indian children around you, I thought about the fact that I grew up in a neighborhood, I mentioned this earlier, right, where one family, the parents were from Greece, another they were from Germany, another they were from Italy as well, and then me. And so there were a lot of kids, but quite frankly, none of us ever spoke about this idea of having our foot in both worlds, a foot in the world of the country your parents were from and a foot in the world that you wanted so badly to be recognized,
to be a part of,
as being a part of. We never ever talked about that. And a part of that, I think, is because when we all got together and just hung out as kids and you played in the neighborhood, you just were kids playing in the neighborhood, and it didn't matter that your parents were from Greece and yours were from Germany and yours were from Italy.
But you all also were socially camouflaged. So if your 5 friends go to the park and you all are making noise, you're just a bunch of kids making noise in the park. If Monica's hanging out with me and she's hanging out with, Jill, whose parents are Japanese, like if you have darker skin, you're going to be treated differently. You're going to stand out. So I think you all were hidden.
I totally understand that, which is why I asked the question earlier too, even just about race and culture. I totally agree with that. My comment was less about race. It was more about this idea of wanting to be American versus the culture where your parents came from. And we never talked about it. We never talked about how annoying it was, quite frankly, that this is how our parents behaved. And they all behaved in the same way. They also all behaved in the very same way.
When I reached out to you, like the things you all are saying are so damn similar. They're so damn similar. It's fascinating.
And so for you to grow up in a neighborhood where you didn't have kids who were like you, who were from either India or who you could connect with in some way as a child of an immigrant, that had to be really challenging, actually, especially because then you feel isolated. Even though my friends and I never talked about it, at least I think I had this assumption that they must be thinking the same thing because they're growing up the same as me. And so for someone like you, if you didn't have that in your neighborhood or with the people you hung out with, did it feel very isolating? Did you feel like I'm the only one who feels this way?
I did and I didn't, because I think I had 2 Persian friends. So I also think that because like what we were talking about earlier, where like you kept your different culture behind closed doors.
Right.
So like growing up, I didn't really see people's parents. Like we were just around,
Right.
and the kids get to be kids. And one of my girlfriends, who I love her to death, and she's,
I hear a disclaimer coming.
Yeah. Her and I've been friends for 25 years, and like she'll make this comment time to time where she goes, I never see you as Indian, like I always think of you as white.
Oh my God. She says that out loud?
She says it out loud, but she's not meaning it as disrespect.
Right.
She's meaning it as saying that like she sees me as a part of the norm.
Yes.
But then like we were talking, like, is this going to change? It's going to change when the norm isn't just white.
White. 100%. 100%.
It doesn't, and it's not black either. Like it's all of the different.
Absolutely.
It's just humans being humans.
Yeah.
Well, I know for me, whenever Juan and I first got together, that was the thing that I did love about her, was that there was an ethnic attachment. Because for me, I grew up in a home where your being black and your identity was very important. And you were to be proud. We were never allowed to walk with our head down. We were to correct people whenever they couldn't say our names. Or, I grew up in, my mother integrated a high school back in the 40s. Like, she's like, don't be fucking around letting people disrespect you.
Yeah.
She's like, everything I went through, they're going to treat you right. So that whole idea of, being able to stand on your own, and not be, like you said, what this friend was saying to you, like, I don't want people to be normal. I don't want you to be, everyone to be white. That was the thing I noticed when I moved to LA from New York. New York is full of ethnic communities. LA felt very homogenous. Everyone wanted to be the same. And it was like, oh man, be Indian, be Japanese, be whatever. You know what I mean? Like, so I would love for that to be the norm, that you could be American, first generation, whatever it is, but who you are is normal. I think that would be really cool.
Whatever normal means, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
But I have to do this because I will keep you here all day, but I have to ask you to tell me about, I am so excited about, we've already told you, we're the biggest groupies. Tell our audience about Hate Proof.
Oh, yes.
Sure, yeah.
Yes,
because Old Scratch
we love
Kitchen,
it.
We're new to this Old Scratch Kitchen, but we got some Hate Proof stuff up in the drawers upstairs.
Yeah, we love it. We love it.
Tell them about your apparel.
So this came about because when Trump was elected...
that did happen, right? Oh, yeah.
It's also a blur.
My husband had a really bad anxiety attack. Like, I mean, that lasted a very long time.
Oh, interesting.
And the night of the election, we drove to my friend's house. We were going to watch the election together. We thought we were going to have a party, right?
Everybody did.
And he had to stay in the car because he was having an anxiety attack. Like, I think he just had this intuition that like something's not going to go right.
Yeah. And
he was, having really bad anxiety, and he's an artist. He's in film, and like, so his medium is very visual, and he just really wanted to like do something. And I was like, you have to do something with your anxiety, like channel it somewhere. Like, you shouting at people who are Trump supporters, like, it's not going to do anything.
It's not helping the situation, buddy. Appreciate your enthusiasm, but no.
And so like it was kind of like a Rain Man incident where like he sees this word. Yeah. Because he was really talking about how, because he grew up in New York, and like you were talking about in New York, like all of the cultures exist out in the open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he was like, I want to create a shield for people, and for people to able to recognize, like, if I'm wearing this shield and you're wearing the shield, like, we're safe together.
Right. I like that. Man,
love that.
And so this word hate proof came to him, and we just went with it. I was like, let's put it out there. And him and I, we know absolutely nothing about apparel, and we started this clothing company. But for us, it isn't so much about the clothes. It's we're not, fashion people. We're not trying to be the next Supreme or something like that. But really, it's about connecting with whoever we can, creating the support. Just the fact that you guys are we know hate proof, we wear it, we feel good in it. And he had the visualization because he's a New Yorker, to be sitting on the subway and having that nod with somebody. We're good, I got you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's how
awesome.
That's how it makes you feel when we wear it, and even when we saw it. First of all, when we were, I don't think we had put it on the recording, but that was the thing. When we were at the Abbott Kinney Festival, and we're magnets for any minority-owned businesses.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
So I think we saw you
and biracial couples.
Yes. Oh, oh my God, you all are like the trifecta. And he's Jewish. We got everything. Do you know any lesbians? Because everything.
It checked all the boxes.
It checked all the boxes, but it had the Rosa Parks T-shirt, which is what we got our daughter, and it was just oh my God, who are these people? And that's why we ended up asking, what is this from, and this and the other.
But I do, Monica, I want you to also talk a little bit about where these get produced, because that's another amazing component, quite frankly, of Hate Proof.
So we found this place called Spectrum. It's in New York, and what they do is it's all adults with autism who work at this company, and it was founded by this woman who her son has autism, and she wanted to create a place for him to always have a job. And what's great about them is because it's silk screening and it's repetitive motion, it's actually really good at calming their brain. And so the whole company is adults with autism, and we try to work with people who, we did the Fix the Pipe shirt, which is just for the pipes in Michigan that are still not fixed. We just forgot about it.
People sure did. Yeah.
It's
amazing.
We give 10% of all of our proceeds to the ACLU because we wanted to find something to give back to that was a blanket, ACLU is for our rights. Whether anybody agrees with what they're doing or not, their sole job is to protect our civil liberties.
Right.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. And is the website hateproof.com?
Yes.
Hateproof.com.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll tag it and we'll put it in there.
Yeah,
we got to do last call.
Thank you.
Monica.
No, Okay. Monica, I can't tell you how much this has meant to us.
Awesome.
Thank you for
so
taking
much.
a moment to share your story.
It's been really great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And best of luck with Old Scratch Kitchen.
Thank you.
Yes,
and
we'll
Hate
link that
Proof
as well. Give our best to your husband and the dog who was barking out back.
Yeah.
I will.
Take care.
Thanks so much.
Stay in touch.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining Drinks with My Wife. Please be sure to click the subscribe button and rate us on Apple Podcast and Spotify.